the subject to has been delivered. Normally what happens is that everybody signs that off with the exception of the supervisor, and the external examiner delegates his right to review the final product yet again to the supervisor, and it's the supervisor's responsibility to deliver that. So that's the way that works. Sometimes, and I've been in a defense where as the chair I had the difficult task of facilitating the conflict in the examining committee about exactly what needed to be changed. And I made, well, actually 2 pages worth of notes that I subsequently typed out, which very clearly articulated the things that were minimum changes that had to be made. And I think in that particular case, it took the student something in the order of 2.5 months to fix. So sometimes the changes are non-trivial. For the most part, they're not all that much, by the way, deal breakers, but you still have to make the changes. There are 2 other outcomes, very unpleasant outcomes they are. The first one is not accepted, and you have 12 months to revise and resubmit. Now what that means is, in vernacular, it means fail, and you have another kick at the can. And you have to do it within a year, and we get another external examiner, and we go through the whole thing again. And if you're not successful in that defense, you're done. So I think I've seen 1 or 2 of those. I've seen at least 2 of those. Resubmit, revise and resubmit. I've seen 2 of those, and 1 was successful and the other is still pending. Still waiting for the student to, he has a year to deal with this. And the last one is not accepted. Do not darken our door ever again. I've never seen that happen because the process is actually designed to prevent that, right? Because if the work is so bad that it's likely to fail at the outset, the external examiner is supposed to blow the whistle and not have the defense. Okay? Is there any questions about this?
Are you going to talk about timelines as well? Just in terms of, like, when you're talking about phase 1 and submitting the manuscript for formatting and those types of things?
You can have the format check anytime you want.
Okay.
Okay, you can go and do that. And doing it sooner rather than later is highly recommended. Because what happens here, you know, I teach project management, and there's a very important notion for project management that speaks to timeline. If it weren't for the last minute, nothing would get done. Okay? So what we do in the universities, we recognize that, and we create last minutes. Okay? And if you don't have your thesis defended and the corrections submitted with the signed off by this date, then you have to register for another term. So what happens is all you folks are jammed up in the 6 weeks prior to the convocation deadline. Okay? And that produces a whole lot of stress that we have to suck up in our office, and that's okay because, you know, we've got good quality people that know how to do that, but it's very stressful for the students, and you don't want to be doing that. So try to do the stuff you need to do earlier. And that begins with making sure your format check is right, and go and see somebody and they'll give you advice. Today, if you take your dissertation down there and say, I'd like a preliminary format check, they'd be pleased to do it. The timelines are on the website, okay? Last minute invites disaster. And you want to disaster-proof this experience. So when I come here to present this morning, I disaster-proof it. First of all, I send my crack team ahead to set this up. Secondly, I have my own memory stick and I made sure that latest presentation was on the memory stick. Third, I emailed myself that presentation to my Gmail account, so if local website, the webmail goes down, I can go to Gmail and get it. And if push came to shove, I can do it without the benefit of the PowerPoints. And that's just for this. Okay, it's not your defense. All right, any other questions around the defense process, the mechanics of the defense process? Okay. In another life, I would give you a presentation on the 9 P's of effective meeting management. And, you know, we don't have time for that today, but here's what they are, and I'm going to try and stick to this particular script, especially around people, purpose, payoff, and the process. So let's just talk about it. I write in my book. Every experience I have, I write down, and here are some things that I thought you might find interesting. So first of all, the presentation part is about public speaking. So public speaking is a really important skill. And the time to start developing your public speaking is not 4 weeks before your defense. It was the day you started your master's degree. Well, okay, you know, it's the old joke. When's the best time to plant a tree? 40 years ago. Second best time is today. So if you have a defense, you want to practice that actual presentation. And one of the most common speaking mechanical errors, if I could express it that way, for people under the age of 30 years old, is the rising inflection at the end of the sentence. So that means rising, it sounds like you're asking a question, you're making an assertion, but it rises at the end, and it makes everybody think that you have a question about your own assertions, as opposed to the dropping inflection at the end of the sentence. Doesn't mean dropping in volume, it means dropping in tone. And that asserts a particular kind of confidence in what you're saying. So the rising inflection is something you want to avoid. So as you can see, the review of the literature was defective, obviously, and that brings me to the issue of the up-to-date literature. So if you have something, and most dissertations have this, an anchor piece. There's some seminal article, in my particular case, it's on data modeling, and so you cannot talk about data modeling unless you talk about Chen from the 1980s and Ted Codd. Okay, but he published in the 1980s. So yeah, you're going to make reference to it, but your literature better refer to something more recent than 1980, right? So by the time you're presenting, you want to make sure, like you probably finished the actual first draft of your dissertation 7 or 8 months ago, you better make sure that there hasn't been something that's come out more recent than that. So you have to have up-to-date literature review. I'm going to read this out loud because it's so important. It is a pleasure to read a thesis where one is not distracted by writing issues. So the writing issues we're talking about is grammar, spelling, typos. And I would say not fewer than 60% of external examiners will comment directly about the quality or lack thereof in the dissertation manuscript. So I know you thought deep thoughts, but if you've expressed those deep thoughts in a confusing way with bad spelling and grammar, people are not going to forgive you easily. So a key principle is you don't interrupt the external, in fact, you don't interrupt anybody who's asking a question until they get the end of it, even if you think you know what the answer is. Now your posture, I mean it is, I regret to have to tell you this, that what your mother told you was true. The way you sit in your chair makes a difference. And if you're leaning forward, that's quite a bit different than if you're leaning back. There are whole messages communicated by that, and you want to communicate a message of engaged humility. Arrogance, and I speak as possibly the most arrogant person you've ever had occasion to listen to, I can assure you it actually doesn't work. It doesn't work all that well for me either, as far as that goes. So, people use the word academic discipline. So an academic discipline, of course, it varies by discipline, but these are the kinds of things that discipline actually means. So there are certain traditional practices, certain analytical approaches, et cetera, culture and language practices. It's worthwhile thinking about that to make sure that in your presentation you don't stray too much from the core of the kinds of norms in your particular discipline. Once you have the PhD, then you'll be able to challenge all the established practices and norms you like. But until you get it, my counsel is live with the culture in which you're embedded. This was really interesting. This was in an English dissertation, PhD. And he didn't check all the quotes. In fact, he went on to say, I didn't check all the quotes, I only checked 14 of them, and after I found out, after 14, there wasn't a single one that was correct. And of course, this is a problem. So effective source management is really fundamental to your success. And if you're not using a citation manager, shame on us again, because it really, really is important to get the quotation and the source very, very correct. And the time to do that is when you copy the source in its original. Okay. So the most important are 2 points in this particular quote. One is about the quality of the manuscript. So the reason that the quality of the manuscript is interesting, an issue, is something that I refer to as proxy assessment, proxy valuation. So I don't have time to give you the full 20-minute lecture that I usually give my MBA students on this, but I'll give you the thumbnail. I usually ask them, how many people here went home for Christmas? And they'll put up their hand. How many people here flew home? And they'll put up their hands. And I said, so on what basis would you judge the quality of your flying experience? And I make a list on the board, and they say how surly the cabin crew was, the so-called food, the quality of the entertainment, the temperature on the airplane, whether it took off on time, and the usual kinds of complaints that we have about modern airline traffic. And then I say, so what are the critical success variables for your trip? And they say, what do you mean? Well, I said, what was actually important in your trip? They're still puzzled. I say, well, how about a sober pilot and a sober co-pilot? Everybody in this room in favor of that? And they sort of look at me dumbfounded, and I said, well, you know, the Delta Flight 642 or whatever it was in Minneapolis, they pulled the pilot and the co-pilot out of the cockpit, had them blow on the breathalyzer, both blew positive. And this is after they landed the airplane. Everybody here in favor of sober pilot? Everybody was up there, okay. I said, well, how about an adequately maintained aircraft? Everybody here in favor of that? They all put up their hands. And I say, how about enough fuel? They say, so what are you talking about? And I tell them the story about the Gimli glider, the 767. I was traveling from Toronto to, I think, Edmonton, and you know, when the pilot was doing his pre-flight cockpit check, he could see out the corner of the window there, you could see the fuel bowser putting the fuel in the wing. And so he naturally assumed that there was fuel, right? Because there was a fuel bowser pumping it in. So. And he looked at his gauge, and the gauge wasn't full. Didn't show full. Now I imagine he took out his pen and did what all men do, you know, tap the gauge like this. And then said, it's just the gauge, right? And this was at a time when there was a changeover in fuel measurement practices, thank you, fuel from what was used to be pounds, which is an imperial weight measure, and they changed to liters, which is a volume metric. So that's a big, you know, like that's a big concern. Anyway, you take off. And over beautiful Dryden, Ontario. Anybody here know where Dryden, Ontario is? Would you care to explain where it is? close to Manitoba, that's as close as he can get to a description. Close to Manitoba. And what he means is, it's not the end of the earth, but you can see the end of the earth from there. 40